Welcome back, everybody, to the second part of our online conference, the Future for Superyachts, Business Jets and Luxury Property. I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, who's going to be addressing, is sustainability still a priority? I know Clive has just come out of hospital, I believe, so we've had the second show of heroics today after Quentin making a last-minute dash to the office. So Clive, we really appreciate you being here and joining us. So this is going to be a discussion on sustainability. Clive has reliably told me that he welcomes tough questions, so I'm just saying, we'll put it out there. So we do welcome your questions. Please put them in the Q&A box rather than in the chat, because it just makes it easier for us to get to those questions. And there will be 10 minutes of questions at the end of Clive's presentation, so plenty of time for you to ask him those tough questions. So Clive, without further ado, over to you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Lorna, and thank you to Keynote Communications for this opportunity to come and talk to you. By way of background, I'm the chairman and founder of Victor. Victor is a provider of on-demand private jet travel. So basically, we provide any type of aircraft for anyone, anywhere in the world. We're now in our 10th year. We've got a database of about 200,000 ultra-high net worth clients. And for our sins, in March of this year, we completed an MBO. In March. So it was a big risk. We've survived, and I've got to say we're now stronger than ever before. And in terms of my role, I've stepped away from being the day-to-day CEO and have left that responsibility in the hands of two young and highly energetic joint CEOs, Toby and James, who are now leading the company. So by way of background, I've been in marketing, communications, and technology for probably the best part of 3 decades. Victor is my 14th company, and you know, as I said, we did this MBO back in March, and like many other companies, we went through some very tough times, where the management furloughed probably about 75% of all our staff. And I've got to say that, you know, today all but one is now back at work, and that person will be returning at the end of the month. So I'm incredibly proud of the passionate men and women in Victor who have helped navigate through this crisis and ensure that the company is remaining strong and one of the leading providers of business aviation. So, you know, with that said, I'm going to turn back to Lorna and say that when Lorna asked me to deliver a keynote on sustainability and should it still be a priority, you know, I really did have to think twice about that, you know, notwithstanding the fact that we are right in the middle of an unprecedented global pandemic. So with that said, I think first and foremost, we've got to believe we're going to get through COVID. We have to believe that, and we will. It's going to take a while. It may take months, it may take years, but if we put it in the context of a decade or 2 decades, and if we put it in the context of humanity, we will prevail. So that does require us to think ahead. That does require us to broaden our horizons and our perspectives, and to raise our expectations and extend our timeline. And what we now need to do when we think about sustainability is we need to look at action, not talk, because there is a huge amount of talk about the issue of sustainability. So in my keynote, I'm going to cover maybe 5 topics. What do we actually mean by the word sustainability? Where does that fit with greenhouse gas emissions? I know there's a lot of confusion there. Who's responsible for doing something about it? And then ultimately, what can you do, you in your particular business? And the fundamental question that I know is on everyone's lips, if you do something, is it going to help or hinder your brand? And ultimately, is it going to hurt your P&L? So if I turn to the topic of sustainability, and I'm going to share a slide, so don't worry, there's only a couple of slides here. Sustainability is an incredibly broad description. It encompasses 3 dimensions, which include environment, social, and economic subsystems. And all of these need to be addressed without compromising future generations and their ability to meet their own needs. So what that actually means for companies when they talk about sustainability is how you source materials, how you manufacturing, how your processes work, your day-to-day operations, how much energy you consume and how much waste you produce, and ultimately what that waste does to the planet and the environment, and also how you create social opportunities for the local populations in the countries that you operate. The list goes on, and I say the list goes on because that word sustainability is incredibly broad. But what is clear is both the economy and society are constrained by the limits of our Earth's ecosystems. So when I hear people and organizations talk about becoming more sustainable and think they are referring to their carbon footprint, the answer is probably yes, they are, but most likely they're not. They're talking about the bigger picture of sustainability. So as we struggle to cope with the economic impact of a global lockdown, and as in the UK and many other countries, a second wave of COVID, we have to also think about looking beyond this crisis and addressing the biggest issues and threats to our climate and in turn our economies. And this is due to fast changing and extreme weather conditions, and this is where greenhouse gas emissions comes in. So when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, there are all sorts of gases swirling around in the atmosphere. But the one that really is the most important is carbon dioxide. And it is the amount of carbon dioxide, CO2 as we call it, that's accumulating in our atmosphere and that is contributing to global warming. And that tipping point is not far off. So when we talk about tipping points, we're talking about the average temperature on Earth. And if we see that rise any further, i.e. 1.5 degrees, which is this big number that's on everyone's lips, if it rises more than 1.5 degrees, then about 14% of the Earth's population will be exposed to severe extreme heat waves once every 5 years. If that jump goes to 2 degrees, the amount of the population that's going to be exposed will increase to 37%. That is a massive, massive amount of exposure. So of course our polar ice caps will melt. They are melting. And much of the world's low-lying coastal districts will flood. And we're not talking beaches, we're talking farmland, water treatment plants, nuclear power stations, marinas, airports, coastal cities, and many, many millions of people. So the important thing to understand is that global warming comes from the burning of fossil fuels. And this is not a uniform process. So different parts of the world will be impacted more quickly than others. For example, the poles, which are warming much faster than others. So this is why we talk about a climate emergency. We talk about trying to prevent that increase in average Earth temperatures of 1.5 degrees. And that's important because some of these places have already crossed the line. And I'm going to give you a quick look at the issues that we're facing today in terms of where all those emissions are coming from. And you can see from the slide here that it's broken down from forestry to agriculture to industry to shipping to rail and air transportation and road. So there are all sorts of areas where this is coming from. So fundamentally, we've got to think about our carbon footprint and what we can do to address it. And it's not called a climate emergency for any other reason than we have to do something now. We can't simply ignore the problem. And part of that problem really is a mass affluent consumers who are largely to blame for this. Blaming because they have the choice about what they want to do and what they want to buy. And us, we're in business to provide them those luxuries, whether it's yachts, it's jets, or luxury properties. And there was a really interesting report that came out, which is from Oxfam, and I think it was the Stockholm Environmental Institute, that talked about the world's richest 1% causes double the CO2 emissions of the poorest 50. So we have a responsibility, if we're in the industry of yachts, jets, planes, and properties, to recognize that our businesses are predicated on others being able to enjoy and afford and aspire through innovation and hard work to get these wonderful things in life. that keeps the world going round. So if we want to get through COVID, we want to get through this crisis, we have to support a society of equal opportunity to encourage those future generations of ultra high net worth entrepreneurs and business leaders to aspire to a better and greater life for themselves and their families. But we must also recognize we can't keep trashing the planet. So when I look at emissions, you can see that fundamentally, if we do not address the issue of rising CO2 in the atmosphere, we will pass that tipping point, and we have to keep the planet below this average temperature rise of 1.5 degrees. I've got some interesting stats here also to share with you, which have come directly from NASA. In 2005, the number of carbon dioxide particles in the air, it's measured in parts per million, was 380. It's now 414. So as you can see from this chart on screen at the moment, we are going up exponentially. And the issue around carbon dioxide is that it is the world's most long-lived greenhouse gas. So it absorbs less heat per molecule than other gases such as methane or nitrous oxide, and it stays in the atmosphere for much longer. So from a responsibility standpoint, governments can set the framework, they can set goals and targets, but we actually need people like you and I to get behind what we're going to do to change this. Not just shouting from the rooftops, but deciding how are we going to make a difference. And most importantly, if we are offering free choice to consumers to buy our products or services, how are we willing to clean up after ourselves? And you know what? That starts with probably the single biggest cause, which is fossil fuel. And I call it a very simple answer. It is all about the fuel. So with fossil fuels largely being used to generate energy, it's down to us in our sector. Boats, planes, and buildings in the luxury sector have huge demands on energy and hence a significant carbon footprint. And really, it's down to us to think about whether our clients are immune to the social economic pressures and challenges that the world's going through now, or are they going to be influenced by their peers and their children who may influence their consumer buying behaviors? So, now is the time to start looking at it. And from a personal perspective, I'm a private jet company boss. I founded Victor, probably one of the most successful private jet companies in the world, but I also have a huge commitment to protecting the environment, and that starts with walking the talk. And maybe, just maybe, I might be able to inspire one or two of you and a few others to also take a stand in your own industry, because I firmly believe that we've got to keep the world spinning, but we have to learn and adapt and improve. So in July 2019, we took a very bold decision, effectively to turn off our marketing budget and use that to drive an environmental sustainability campaign. And that campaign started with us calling out our industry and saying that we pollute 20 times more per passenger journey than commercial airlines. Not a great start to an advertising campaign, but a very bold start. And our campaign started with the slogan, "This is our truth, what's yours?" And that threw down the challenge to our customers to step up to the plate and do something themselves. So we mandated a 200% carbon offset from every single Victor flight from the start of July. We took that money and plowed that into UN accredited and approved carbon offset programs, which were effectively capturing carbon out of the atmosphere or preventing further carbon releases. And we asked our customers to dig deep and top up. And where the airlines were operating with less than 1% of their customers topping up with carbon offsets, Victor now has got to the point where it's about 9% of our customers are topping up. So this is about influencing behavior and changing the way that people think about their responsibilities. So the question to you guys is, what else can you do? Well, whatever you do, one thing's for sure, you need to stand up. You need to make sure that your claim and your pledge will be able to withstand some external scrutiny. And that means being honest with your customers. Otherwise, they'll simply see it as greenwashing. And whatever you also do, it's something that needs to be measurable. So with Victor, in our first month, we had published not only the number of flights that we flew, but how many tons of carbon we produced and how many tons of carbon we took out of the atmosphere. And in that just 1 month, July 2019, that was the equivalent of saving about twice the size of Central Park in New York. It was a start. We had no idea how far it would go, what it would do, but it was a start. So the final question I have for the audience that I'm answering really is, from my perspective, would it help or would it hinder your brand? And ultimately, would it hurt your P&L? I'll talk to you about my P&L in a moment, but ultimately what you've got to be looking for is, how do you identify the wins? Can this enhance your brand reputation? And from our perspective, it became a significant differentiator, particularly in a world post-COVID. So it's helped us protect and gain market share. So our whole commitment to going beyond offset is really a commitment to publish what we're doing, to be open and honest and transparent about that, and to find other business leaders that are also willing to stand up, make a very public and transparent commitment to reducing their carbon footprint, and demonstrate that their organization and their staff and their customers can get behind them. So Beyond Offset is a very simple initiative, getting business leaders to step up and publish their carbon footprint, getting business leaders to talk about where and how they are making that level of investment. And the Beyond Offset kind mark can be some form of internationally registered accreditation to say what you are doing can be verified, it is genuine, and it isn't fake. So in addition to that, you have to also be willing to publish where you capture your carbon, what programs that you run through, and ultimately how you can move the needle. So if I end, I can talk about what Victor has done in the last 12 months. And this is fact, because we published it. We have offset over 40,000 tons of carbon dioxide. In marketing dollar terms, that's the equivalent of about $175,000 that came out the company's marketing budget that has gone into this commitment. And yes, it's real, and yes, it's very measurable. So the point being, does sustainability matter going forward? Yes, it does. You in the luxury yacht, jet, and luxury property sectors, you do have a chance to influence your customers, because your customers are probably the most important people in the world in terms of their peer groups and how they can influence and set trends and lead companies to think differently. So, I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my thoughts. I'm sure not all of you will agree with them, but that's not the point. The point here is, can you start somewhere? Can you do something? And if you want to know more about Beyond Offset, please contact me through the event organizers, Keynote Communications, or via LinkedIn. And I'm going to hand back to Lorna for some Q&A, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Clive. That was very interesting. We do have a question, but before we come to that, I just want to share with
Lorna,
you, there
I'm
is...
not hearing you.
Oh. Okay. Can you hear me now? So I've definitely got my mic on. Okay,
I've got you now.
Okay, all right then.
Interesting data coming in.
Okay, that's good. So I was just going to say we do have a question here, but before we come on to that, I just wanted to share with you, Clive, the results of a poll I did while you were delivering your very interesting presentation there. And to time with what you were saying, I was asking people if sustainability is still a priority in their businesses, in their business. And I gave them a choice of answers. So we had 66% of people said that yes, they are as committed to sustainability as ever. 24%, so 1 in 4, said we've got other concerns, and they have taken a priority for now. 5% admitted we never really had sustainability goals in the first place, and then 8% said none of the above. So I just wonder, Clive, if those results kind of tally with what you would have expected from a survey like this. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, and I'm blown away with that. 66% saying they're still as committed as ever. I mean, that is absolutely great. I mean, that is such a massive pool out of the audience in terms of their willingness to try and do something. And the question is just take that step. No question with the COVID crisis and the world, in turmoil, that our first priority, my CEO's first priority, was to get their business back on track. Without that, you've got nothing. So fundamentally, that is your first priority. But beyond that, when we look over the horizon, sustainability is key. And I'm just so encouraged by what we've seen here.
Yeah, interesting. So let me come on to the questions. We've got Jessima Timberlake, who has said, I would be really interested to know from Clive, firstly, whether he thinks that C index presented this week is a good benchmarking tool, and two, which sustainability measures should be prioritised for refit shipyards or marina facilities.
Okay, so the second question quite technical about the shipyards, but let's just go back to the first one then.
Yeah, so whether you think that the C index presented this week is a good benchmarking tool.
Well, what was presented this week probably went over my head because I was lying on my back, taking oxygen, having just been through some extensive surgery. So I've missed that. So if I can go with the next question, which is to do with shipyards.
That's right. Sustainability measures, should they be prioritised for refit shipyards or for marina facilities?
I think I go back to my point in the keynote, and I hope I wasn't droning on too heavily about the broad nature of sustainability. But if you look at a shipyard, then the shipyard itself is, how do they refit, how do they work, where do their materials come from, how much energy, how much pollution, etc., etc. Clearly that is a very long and involved process. When you look at the end-to-end part of this business, an extensive business, and how it functions and what its impact is on the environment, in addition to or as part of its overall drive towards sustainability. So as long as the shipyard or the business in question is able to keep itself above water, excuse the pun, and continue to function, then yes, starting somewhere is absolutely key. But it will need some form of external third-party scrutiny. Otherwise, you'll see everyone claiming to become more sustainable and very few people doing something about it. And therefore, my point being here is pick something that you can deliver on, no matter how small it is, and publish it and deliver it, and then build from there.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we're almost out of time, Clive, but one thing I wanted to ask you is, I mean, as you say, that was quite an impressive result we got back from the poll there. And I'm certainly not suggesting that this is the case for any of the companies out there who've replied. But I'm just wondering if you find often that there's a kind of mismatch, if people are saying one thing and maybe, paying lip service, if you like, and not necessarily, they're talking the talk, but they're not necessarily putting those sustainability policies into practice as well as they say they are. Is there a lot of lip service going on, do you think?
I definitely feel that, and I think first of all, the broad notion of sustainability, and the second, the issue of offsetting carbon footprints. So the question for most businesses today is, well, who's responsible for that? Do I, as the charter broker, am I responsible for that? Am I responsible for that as the operator or the manufacturer or the engine manufacturer or the fuel producer? Or should I, as a consumer, be responsible for that? And I think fundamentally what we've got to recognize that the consumer has free choice to buy that product, to take that journey, to spend that money on that luxury property or that luxury vacation. They should account for the carbon footprints associated with what they consume, because it's their free choice. Businesses need to encourage that. But just offering carbon offsetting as an optional extra, tick the box, puts you in the category of an airline where less than 1% of the customers were doing that. So I think industry today has to step up and take some responsibility and demonstrate to their customers that they are doing something. They are writing a check, not necessarily a huge check, but a check that is attributed to the carbon output of their product or service. And that's a really easy place to start. So with Victor, we're publishing our results starting in a month or so's time into Beyond Offset. So the number of flights that we fly, the amount of carbon associated with it, and where we are going to buy our UN approved carbon credits. And that those programs are open to scrutiny, i.e. where our money goes. So everyone can see what we say we're going to do and whether we've actually done it. And I think that puts a much bigger spotlight on businesses today to actually be accountable and stop just talking and taking real action.
Excellent. Well, Clive Jackson from Victor Air, thank you very much indeed for being with us today. And I'm afraid we are really out of time now, but hopefully you'll be able to join us for the rest of the conference and maybe throw some interesting questions back at some of the other panelists and speakers. Incidentally, in the chat, you'll see that somebody has actually put a link there for the index that we mentioned earlier. So you might want to take a look at that.
Yeah. Thank you. Great.
Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, everyone, so we are now moving on to our next section, and we have some new panelists just joining us here. So the next discussion that we're coming to is marketing post-pandemic, and I'm going to be asking our panel here, how have the super yacht, business aviation and luxury property industries changed their marketing strategies post-COVID? So I'm going to be moderating this session, and I'm joined by Taunya Renson-Martin from Machmedia.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Taunya. So Tanya's been active in the business aviation industry, initially as a journalist and then as a publisher, and more recently as founder of a marketing and PR agency. She's been doing that for 18 years. And she was born and raised in Washington, DC. She's lived in Belgium since 2000. So welcome, Taunya. We have Tobias Laps, who is the Executive Vice President Sales of Comlux Management. Tobias actually holds a private pilot license for 20 years, and he's passionate about aviation. He joined the Comlux team in November 2015 as VP Sales for Western Europe, Asia and India. And in 2018, Tobias was appointed to Senior VP Head of Sales for Large VIP Aircraft. And then 2019, he became Executive VP for Commercial Large VIP Aircraft. I've got Pandora Matherlees. Hi, Pandora, joining us. She is a super yacht art consultant. She's an art specialist and art professional. Her career spans 20 years in management and sales at board level. She was VP ArtNet's Global Sales. Her work in the cultural sector has involved directing government funded projects in culture and education, government lobbying, team development, marketing, product strategy and rebranding. So well qualified for this panel. And then we have Julian. So Julian, I'm going to let you just briefly introduce yourself if you may. I don't have your, oh sorry, hang on, yes I do, excuse me. So Julian is the chairman of Vertis Aviation. He's been integral in building the outstanding reputation and global network that has become synonymous with the Vertis premium brand. He joined Vertis in 2013 as managing director. and he focused on developing the company's independent charter sales activity. In 2018, the move to company headquarters heralded the next growth phase for the business and Julian's transition as chairman. So, Patrick, so I think I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Patrick. I don't have a bio for you. So do you want to just say a few words about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I would say a super yacht industry, jack of all trades, master of none. I've been across various different parts of the super yacht sector most of my career, in boat shows, in publishing, in brokerage, in shipyards, working with family offices, but always super yacht related. Excellent,
thank you. So that's our panel, and thank you very much everyone for being with us today. So what I'd like to ask you first of all is what has changed in terms of marketing strategies post-COVID, and will these changes be permanent? And perhaps if I can throw that question out to you first, Julian.
Sure, thank you, Lorna, thank you very much. I think with this question, you need to think of what was pre-COVID, so before the pandemic started, and now what we're facing during the pandemic. And if you look at, let's call it pre-COVID, I think we were in a situation, or marketeers were in a situation where they had lots of marketing channels to choose from. So they had their marketing message, and they had a whole array of channels that they could pick from, and were doing so. But now, of course, since the pandemic has hit, a number of those channels are no longer available. So you've got marketeers who are really having to think about what their marketing message really is, and then think, gosh, what marketing channels do I now have? And so what really has changed is the fact that the number of channels has reduced to basically digital marketing. I mean, digital marketing is now the area that has been a big focus, and a lot of companies have decided, I mean, we're one of them, to really use digital marketing a lot more, because you can't go quiet during this time, and you have to keep engaging with your customer, keep engaging with your fans and your followers, and digital marketing is one way of doing that. So we all appreciate that digital marketing has been around pre-COVID. There was a distinct move towards using digital marketing a great deal more, but of course that has been accelerated a huge amount since the start of the pandemic. You just have to look at the price of a share for Zoom to appreciate that. So things like social media, things like email marketing, SEO, digital marketing, all that has been a huge focus since the start of the pandemic. Those changes permanent? I believe they are. I think they are. I think people have really taken an appreciation about on the strength of digital marketing, and will potentially really review what they have done in the past pre-pandemic, and will probably decide that maybe some of their marketing dollars are better spent in areas such as digital marketing, rather than, let's call them, more traditional ways of marketing.
Excellent. Thank you, Julian. So Tobias, I'd like to put the question to you. What do you think about marketing strategies during COVID and post-COVID? Are they going to change forever?
Well, I tend to agree with Julian on a lot of things. So definitely one of the most common channels has fallen away, and that is exhibitions for the business jet industry. I think there really has, there was no exhibition that has taken place this year, and everybody was still hoping that NIBA would take place in December, and now this has been postponed to next year, to February, and let's see if it can take place then or not. But clearly this traditional way of connecting with people is gone. And so the transition had to go to digital channels quite quickly, and it has worked, and we see that in the interaction that we have through those channels. Now, from my perspective, will that stay forever? Yes, I mean, digital marketing for sure will stay, but once the pandemic will be over, will we be able to go back to some of the traditional channels? Yes, I believe so. And I think one of the elements that is missing and is difficult to transmit and bring across is the empathy, is the personal relationship, is the interaction. Yes, we're having now a video conference and we're together in a digital conference, but it would be different if you would be there in person. You're missing out the informal part, you're missing out some of the more subtle movements that you would be able to pick up. And in a discussion with the client, it's definitely a difference if you have a chance to meet face to face, or if you do it through a video conference, or even worse, a telephone conference.
Interesting.
Yes and no. I think yes, for sure, the focus on digital marketing will continue, maybe even increase. But at the same time, as soon as there is the possibility, some of those traditional channels will come back.
Interesting, thank you. Yeah, well, I mean, we're going to discuss this at one of the sessions later on about the future for industry events and shows and so on. But I certainly know from my point of view, and I think we discussed this, Tobias, going to eBase, and in particular last year, it really felt extremely quiet, and that was obviously pre-COVID. It did feel lacking in energy and lacking in exhibitors, to be frank. So you do feel in a way that COVID has maybe exacerbated some of the tendencies that were already there. Pandora, if I can put the question to you about this, I know that you have, you've mentioned to me that there's nothing like doing business with people over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, better still. How do you feel that marketing has changed during this period and will continue to change?
Well, hello everyone. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Because I had about half an hour's problem with my microphone, so that's good. Good morning everyone, and it's fantastic to be here, and thank you for inviting me, Lorna. I say at a macro level, when this pandemic hit us, media budgets were slashed and ad spend went down something like $26 billion. So that was quite a significant impact. But, it's very much compared to the 2008 crash, and people were sort of trying to look at what they were doing. But I think they very quickly recalibrated what they were doing, and they were very fast to move back into ad spends, because I think people look at what their competitors are doing. Perhaps they should be looking more at the clients, but I think people do also really watch their competitors. So I think this came back around about sort of May, and so people started spending more. Yes, of course, you have to be where your audience is. So those spends moved very much, into the social media space and online. Yes, of course, we've all adapted to Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, and, even I was invited at midnight once by someone on a WhatsApp Superyacht group to a party in the Remo Lounge, and I had to put on my makeup, and someone said, I've got to introduce you to someone, meet us on table 4. And, that sort of thing I would not have done before, I think, but I sort of stepped up to it because, the opportunity was there. So I think we're embracing what we can. We've embraced the webinar. They're sort of generally free and easy to produce. I think these things are all so much easier where we've known each other, in the real world. I mean, Lorna, we met, in Vancouver, for instance, and, where you've had a personal relationship with someone, you've done a lot of networking, you've been out there, the people. I think that's a lot easier, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it, without those things in place. I think things are getting a lot less formal. I've seen a lot less formality. I think, when we have our Zoom calls, people are much more casually dressed. I can see this in the media tone, in the way that, Instagram and other things are used. We're all using emojis and shortening everything. It could be good or bad, but there's a lot more sort of casual approach, but professional, but a lot more humanity. And I think it's brought everyone together in terms of sort of trying to, you know, overcome the difficulties that we've had. Whether it's permanent, I think this has forced a trend on us. I think we should also realize that this is probably not going to be the last pandemic. I mean, this is going to be the future. And, you know, even if we do get an effective vaccination, you know, what's going to be the next thing that's going to hit us? So I think the fact that we've all adapted very fast is good, and we probably wouldn't have done it if we'd been given warning. And I think if you'd said to half the offices, you're going to be working from home in 1 week's time, no one would have done it. But, you know, they have adapted. But I think we have to really look to the future as being one fraught with difficulties.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about people sort of becoming a bit more casual, maybe in their appearance on Zoom calls and so on. And I was speculating with somebody earlier that maybe there's a market for a fashion designer to come up with Zoom friendly clothing, you know, that's sort of smart on top, but sort of smart casual at the bottom end, just in case you have to stand up during a call. So anyway, Patrick, what do you think about marketing post-pandemic?
I think in some ways this whole thing's been a bit of a perfect storm. As Julian was saying, you know, the number of tools in our armory, or the number of weapons at our disposal, have been greatly reduced because we're all sitting in our lounges at home, unable to do all the events or go to the printers and print brochures, and, you know, everything suddenly become focused on digital. But whether it's by chance or not, digital produces possibly the best return on investment for every marketing dollar spent versus these other things that were at our disposal. So our minds have been completely focused now on digital, which is actually exactly where we should be focusing anyway. So it's a perfect storm in that respect. You know, as marketeers, I think many of us, by default, we go to the show because that's what we've always done. We print the annual catalogue because that's what we've always done. And what will happen if we're not there? What happens if our competitors seem to be doing that, but we're not? And so we start to get into a very sort of formulaic mold with our marketing activities. And now we're questioning everything. You know, I think what's going to be very interesting is not this period, but in about 6 months. You know, was there an effect by us not going to that show? Was there an effect after 6 months of us not sending out that magazine? Was there an effect of us not doing all those traditional marketing activities that we would normally have done during the spring and summer of 2020? And we probably won't be able to tell whether that has had a real effect on sales. But certainly in the Superyacht world, it's not a minute by minute process. It can take sort of 6 months or more to nurture a lead into something more interesting, into a sale. So time will tell. But certainly in the future, when we look at our marketing planning, I mean, digital will form the absolute backbone, as it does already, of Northrop & Johnson's marketing. But when we start to have those conversations at the end of the year or next spring, should we go back and do that boat show? Should we go back and do that event? Should we return to normal? I will want to hear a very resounding reason why. And if someone can't give me a compelling reason why we should go back to doing X, Y, and Z, why they think that's going to produce a better return on investment than the other digital and online marketing activities that we're doing, then it's not going to happen for us in the future. We will stick with what's working and what's producing the best return on investment.
Thank you, Patrick. Excellent. So, Taunya, I know you've got some clear views about digitalization. What do you think?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that has been said on the panel. But beyond digitization, I would even talk about customer experience. We are all now accustomed to having things quickly, to having things personalized, to being in the center of our decision making, and we pull information as we need it. So I think the focus has to be on how do you give people the same customer experience that you used to give offline, online as well. And so I think that's going to be a huge focus, and a key to that is data. And so people talk a lot about digital transformation. Right now we're definitely at digital acceleration. If you're not collecting data, if you're not analyzing data, how great or how small, in order to better understand your customers, in order to better understand and personalize the experience that they have with you, even if they are online, then you're missing out on a huge opportunity. The other thing I would say beyond digital too is we used to talk about B2B businesses or B2C businesses. At the end of the day, it's H to H, right? It's human to human. And so it's all about people want to buy from a company or a person that has a purpose greater than to just sell to them a service. And I think that's a huge focus and something that people should be thinking about as well. If you've spent a lot of time promoting what you do, you really need to be thinking at this time about why you do it. And if you are able to communicate about the purpose that you have, be it related to sustainability, be it to connecting individuals or doing something greater for society, that's a thing that is going to differentiate you. And it's also going to open up more business opportunities for you, because when you are stopped just doing the what, so selling flights or selling or chartering aircraft is a what, but if your business becomes connecting individuals across the globe, then what other opportunities are available to you in your business model that you can take advantage of digital to be able to integrate and make your own business more sustainable.
Interesting. Yeah, well, there are certainly plenty of opportunities for some companies at least to pivot, as you say, using the data and the contacts that they already have. And I know some are already doing that quite successfully. So that's interesting. Well, we're talking a lot, obviously, about digital marketing, and no surprises there, given what's going on at the moment, as we're saying, the impossibility of getting out to shows and events that are not being run anyway. I wondered with social media platforms if anyone's got experience of how their use of these is changing. I don't think I'm giving away any trade secrets here if I say that in the conference business, in the events business, we use LinkedIn a lot, for instance, but I wondered how people were finding the use of Instagram, Twitter, I mean, even TikTok, which is traditionally aimed at, a younger market, but I understand now that's kind of growing up, what people's views are about the use of various different social platforms within our industries. Does anyone want to?
I can speak briefly about one particular case from the last few weeks, which is that, we've said for years, boat shows are essential because you've got to step on board a boat before you can fall in love with it, and then you buy it. I mean, it's essential to experience and feel that boat. Well, in the last 3 weeks, we've sold 3 boats to 3 clients who have never seen the boat, never stepped on board, except watching a YouTube video. So we reached out to them and found them via social media. They viewed the yacht via social media, and they bought the boat remotely. The day of completion was the first time they stepped on board. So things are definitely changing, even when you're talking about assets, acquisition of assets in the 5s or 10s of millions.
Yeah, and they bought those, well, sight unseen or physical sight unseen.
Yes,
that really is
incredible. But let nobody suggest any longer that multimillionaires or billionaires are not on social media. That is a total misconception if anyone's still believing that.
So I'm wondering, for those of you then on the business aviation side of things, Tobias, Julian and Taunya, if you've had any experience of that, of people potentially buying planes via social media, or not actually seeing the plane, just seeing it through an app.
If I may, if I can just jump in here. I wouldn't say we have had an experience of that. It would be great, but not so far. But we as a company, since the start of the pandemic, have really taken digital marketing very, very seriously, and hadn't beforehand. I mean, we had to dabbled a little bit, but we actually we actually have now employed a full-time digital marketing person who's looking after that for us. I mean, she's in-house and she looks after that because it is so important. And I think what we're seeing is that a lot of our competitors are also taking digital marketing more seriously, because pre-pandemic, one could argue that, you know, social media, let's say, was used sporadically, and you would put a picture up of something every few days. But now, of course, we realize that it's the way to get across to your fans, to your customers, to your followers, and so the marketing message can get out there very, very quickly. And so, like I say, we've taken it very seriously. Our competitors are equally taking it very seriously, and it's great to see how many likes you get every day and how many more followers you're getting and so on. It's quite fun. But no, seriously, it's something that we as a company have taken now seriously, and a lot more are as well.
Excellent. Yeah.
I'd like to just jump in to say one thing that companies who are involved in this area or are looking into getting into doing more social media is to remember that it's not just another place to kind of do a one-way communication where you're just pushing out information about whatever product or service that you are trying to share with people. Social media, the word social says it all. This is about a conversation. It's about building communities of people. It's about building advocates for your brand and for your business. And just like any good conversation, listening is incredibly important. So it's knowing what people are talking about and understanding what is important to people, and then participating in that conversation. So there's a book from a long time ago, Gary Vaynerchuk, and it's called Jab, 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 Right Hook. And the basic premise of that is the jab, jab, jabs are the added value that you're providing to people. You're not asking for anything, you're contributing information, you're being part of a conversation, you're doing that, and every once in a while, right hook, you share something about your service. So you're building trust, and then you're also demonstrating what you can provide as a business.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you, Taunya. So I'm just wondering then, Pandora, if you've had any sort of experience of this, if there's within the art education business, if you've had to change the way you put across your services to your market, and how that's changed during the pandemic.
Absolutely. I mean, first, I'd agree with what Taunya's just been saying. I think this idea of sort of giving away what you can free in order to hook people in, I think is a very much a trend that is now has taken off. I think also, you know, the super yacht industry, like the art industry, they're luxury industries, and they were many years ago very slow to embrace digital because they thought it was not, you know, it was all about the touch and the feel of a luxury brand, and they had to play catch up pretty fast. And you know, Patrick's right, everybody is on Instagram or some sort of social media. For us, what we did is I've got an education brand. I don't sell art on yachts, by the way. It's all about education and training. And so I kind of split out the brand because obviously we couldn't go to places to train. So we've started to work to take that online, but also to focus much more on Instagram and individuals. So to bring that training to people that perhaps have been put out of work, or they're looking, you know, we formed a collaboration with Life After Yachting, for instance, to look at how people might want to transition into another part of the luxury industry after the art world. So I think it has been a time to, you know, really sort of rethink what you're doing and look at where those opportunities are and what you can create. I think we've got a lot more reliance, obviously, on social media now, and I think that's a big concern because, you know, you're losing control. I had a colleague who lost 17,000 followers on his Facebook account because, I don't know, he used the wrong, you're not supposed to use, he just lost them all and had to start are on these platforms. And I think that's something really, really to think about. And I do know, because I talk to media agencies, that the media agencies, you know, quite a few of them have sort of moved away a little bit from Facebook to other platforms because they felt that Facebook in this time wasn't as supportive of initiatives such as Black Lives Matter and other initiatives that obviously in everyone's mind at the moment. But Facebook's attitude was, well, we don't care because we know you'll come back to us because you have to. So I think, you know, being able to own your customers and own that relationship and that exposure and your sales funnel is something really, really to think about.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, well, obviously Facebook has had a little bit of flack over the last couple of years, and it's interesting to see that kind of reaction. So I've got a couple of I've got a question here actually for you, Patrick. It's from David Robinson. He says, "Hi Patrick, in regard to your comments with the superyacht market being such a person-to-person business, do you not think that future marketing strategies will be based on a mix of both digital and going to the shows and the catalogues, or is it too early to decide?"
Well, hi, David. I think it would be, again, a misconception to think that you can't build a personal relationship online. You know, it's not that you're at arm's length and in a different country and separated physically, therefore you cannot get involved in quite a deep relationship with either a prospect or a client before meeting them in person or before speaking to them in person. You know, with the sheer scale of, we're in the superyacht world, we're selling pretty cool, exciting stuff. And so it attracts a lot of attention online and you get a lot of interaction with your audience. And trying to filter that down into the sort of let's say the real clients or the real conversations. We're now having to do a lot of work with, for instance, AI and chatbots. So we're engaging with our clients sometimes 5-6 times before we even have a physical conversation with them, analyzing what they've said via social media or what they've said in their emails to us, what they've inquired, and then choosing from an array of pre-prepared responses that go back to them. So there's a sort of understanding. There's an acceptance, I think, with this sort of technology, and there's a perception that they're building up actually quite a close relationship with us before we've even had a conversation. So it's not only when you're face to face or only when you're on the phone that that the relationship is sort of becomes real and becomes intimate. But yes, there is of course nothing like sitting across from a potential client over dinner and talking to them for 3 hours about, you know, their family and their children and everything else and life. And that is, of course, irreplaceable at this stage. Maybe we'll be in virtual dining rooms in the future and we won't even need to travel, but maybe that's one step around the corner.
So thank you very much, Patrick, and thanks for the question, David. So I'd just like to share the poll results with you. So I put out a poll during this panel just asking our audience what they thought. And I asked firstly if people's own businesses, within their businesses, have they stepped up their marketing during the pandemic period? And I asked them to agree if that was the case, disagree, or to say they didn't know, or none of the above. And actually 59% of people said yes, their company has stepped up its marketing during this time. 20% have disagreed, 20% say they don't know or none of the above. And secondly, I asked the COVID-19 situation will lead to long-term changes to marketing strategy. Do you strongly agree? 57% said yes, that they felt that COVID would lead to long-term changes. Some 43% agreed somewhat, and there's only 2% that disagreed. So that's actually quite a striking result, in my opinion. Does anyone in the panel care to comment on that? Is that what you'd expect people out there to say? I mean, obviously we're hearing from you and your businesses, but I just wondered how you felt, you know, what else was going on out there.
That doesn't surprise me, and I'm actually a firm believer that, so if there was the old normal and if there is a new normal, we're not there yet at the new normal. We're in a transition stage right now. So I think there is still something new to come in how we are relating with each other, doing business with each other, that we may not even have seen yet. And I think smart business owners will be looking at that. Some people call it the day after tomorrow. So some people, smart business owners, should be looking not to the future immediate, not to tomorrow, but to the today after tomorrow, because by the time you start mixing in artificial intelligence along with this big data, I mean, you're going to have a whole nother beast, and it could be a wonderful beast if you use it well, and it could be a horrible beast that is wholly disruptive to everything you've been doing up until now. But you have control over that. I don't mean that to be ominous. I don't mean that to be ominous. I mean, you can use it. It's exciting, I think. So.
Yeah, use it wisely. Yeah, Patrick.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that 20% of your people polled said they have not stepped up their marketing activities during this period, which I find staggering. And with the greatest respect, I wish them very good luck. I mean, I think now is the time to take stock of things, to prepare for the future. You know, our marketing team is working all hours, God send, to prepare for when we start to emerge. So we're absolutely strong as a house, and not playing catch up next spring or whenever we start to get out of this. Now's the time to prepare.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I've got a question here, a question for Taunya, actually, from Vera Nunez. And she says, how do you emigrate the customer experience from offline to online?
That's a really great question. A lot of times people like to jump straight to tactics when it gets to marketing and don't spend, I don't think, enough time in the pre-stage, in the strategy stage. And the strategy stage is really taking the time to get to know your customers, segment your customers, develop audience personas for your customers, and start to see what they used to do, what are they doing today. So for example, before we start building any kind of campaigns, we are putting together customer personas, where we're really looking at the demographics and the psychographics of the customers that we would be reaching out to. And in the psychographics, we're even looking at what kinds of channels are they on right now? Are they watching Netflix shows? Are they on social media? If so, which channels of social media? Are they too busy to be opening emails? Are they overwhelmed by too many events? We're asking all of these questions, and that's in close collaboration with sales teams, and also looking at data and developing these personas. Then once we have the personas, then we start looking at all the different touch points that they might have with the company. And then how do we take the experience that they used to have, you know, what did they love about your business before COVID-19? And how can you make sure that they still love that same thing about your business, even though they're engaging with you through a Zoom call or through social media or through an email? And then that's when you start to design those tactics. Once you've figured out all of that, then you start designing those tactics. So take the time and use the data that you have. Even if it's not a lot, just use it.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, I guess one of the questions is with trying to persuade people to ramp up their marketing activity is also the marketing spend as well, because if companies are concerned about the long-term future of maybe even their industries, let alone their own organizations, with the impact of COVID, then there is the tendency, I guess, just to hunker down and think, well, we're not going to spend too much money at the moment because we don't know what's going to happen with our cash flow. So, you know, that must be having an impact, I imagine, on some people. They're just counting the pennies, basically.
Yeah,
People
so it's
are
just
absolutely
about spend
right.
wisely. Yeah.
And you know, in a nutshell, you will not see any better ROI than in online activity. So if you're saving money by not going to boat shows, put it online and you'll be very surprised at how quickly you can see a very, very solid, good return and a very, very low cost per lead. Excellent.
Good advice. We heard it here first, so fantastic. Thank you. So we have one more question, and this is from Olivia Durand. And Olivier is asking, how is digital marketing used and relevant to new business contacts versus repeat existing customers? Does anyone care to take that question? So it's about using digital marketing for new customers versus repeat or existing customers. Anyone, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I can jump in here quickly.
Thank you.
I think certainly in business aviation, you've seen a lot of people who've never chartered before suddenly show quite a lot of interest, because, you know, some of them are a bit fearful of flying commercially, or you don't have the connections any longer that were there before. They still need to travel or would like to travel. And so they have started to look at the potential of chartering a private jet. So we've certainly seen a big uptick in interest from potential first-time charterers. So the use of social media is fantastic in this case, because Taunya was talking about adding value. Well, you can really add a lot of value by providing a lot of information about private jet charter, about what is being done in the industry to keep people safe when they do travel, and so on. And you know, we've certainly tried to do that. So that's what we've certainly seen in business aviation.
I would add also, just make sure people can find you. Some people, you know, you spend a lot of time making great websites and things like that, and then the search engine optimization has been not thought of, and there was no particular search engine marketing plan. YouTube is the second largest search channel, so that's video. So make sure people can find you. If you're going to spend money wisely, spend it on optimizing your site, so that when people do Google business jet charter or luxury yacht or whatever, that you're coming to the top. Because if they're new to the industry, they probably don't know the difference between one brand or another brand, and they're really going to the top brands that appear at the top of the search, and they start their investigation there. So be there.
Excellent. Well, look, we're almost coming to the end of our time, folks, but I guess I have sort of one final question for all of you. I read a lot in the Superyacht press, and I'm imagining it's the same for the business aviation side, that obviously you've got a new generation of owners or potential owners coming up, and I wonder how that impacts your marketing strategies, in that you're having to build up a whole new profile of the potential owner. I mean, I guess it's sort of pointing towards doing more digital marketing, but is that the case, or how does it work? Have you got any thoughts on that, Tobias, or is that not something you're involved in?
No, absolutely. And I think it plays in our hands, as you say, that there's a new group of customers coming up. Typically, they tend to be younger, more into social media and other digital channels. And of course, we cater for that. We have a new product coming up that we will hopefully be able to talk about in October. And basically, the marketing is fully digital on that. And it's also in a way that you can customize it towards the interest of the client. It's going to be without any paper, and it will allow basically a customer-centric approach in presenting the product. And that will require people to be open for that. But I think with the younger generation coming into the seat of being the purchaser, I think that's going to work well. And we were very excited about that.
Excellent. Okay. Well, look, folks, we're coming to the end of our time. So I would like to take the opportunity to thank all of you, Patrick, Tobias, Julian, Pandora, Taunya. Thank you so much. It's been a really interesting session, and I personally have learned a lot. If anybody wants to get in contact with any of our panelists here and you know, follow up from some of the points, and I'm sure they'd be pleased to hear from you. Thank you again, guys. Please join the audience and stay for the rest of the conference if you can, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, so we're now moving on to our next section, and you will see that we have Carlos Miguel, who is joining us again here, and Carlos is going to kick off the session that's focusing on wine and food provisioning. He's going to be wearing another hat, a sort of virtual chef's hat for this session. So let me tell you about his role within the provisioning side of the industry. So Carlos has been working with SASYSS. You say that SASYSS?
SASYSS makes it easier.
Okay, yeah, I'll say that. Since 2015, the company is a full concierge service agency serving Chile, Argentina, Peru and Uruguay, with the main emphasis being Patagonia and Antarctica, providing all logistical support for super yachts. Carlos worked as an aficionado guest chef, cooking Chilean dishes for a yacht cruising Patagonia. And he's also a qualified WSET wine educator, organising wine tours and education for guests and crews. During his free time, he enjoys cooking for his family and friends, playing tennis, and his hobby includes conventional and drone photography. So Carlos, I know you've got some panelists here with you. I'm going to pass over to you for you to introduce everybody, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Lorna, and it's a pleasure to be back now wearing a little bit of a different hat. And I would like to introduce to you, let me see if technology will be on our side this time, and we're not going to have several presenters, so it's going to be a little bit easier. We're going to be talking about provisioning in remote areas, and we have chosen two remote areas, one of them in the Mediterranean, which is more familiar to a lot of people that are in the audience, which is Malta, which is actually quite remote within the Mediterranean. And then, of course, Antarctica, which is very close to what we do in SASYSS. And along in the audience is also Tomas Miranda, our CEO and COO. So the panelists that we have today are Andrew Azzopardi from number 12, Fine Wines and Provisions. We have Greg Mikusinski from Provide and Supply. And then we have two chefs to give us the view from the onboard, from the yacht side. They're both chefs on rotation on Legend that visits several remote locations. On one side, we have Robin Sjöström, and we have Andrew McCartney. Both have been to our area down south. So today we're going to concentrate on talking a little bit about provisioning in the remote areas. Just to give you an idea of what it means, how do you have to plan for provisioning? I just did a very brief calculation, and if you're going to have a 10-day Antarctica charter on a yacht like Legend, which is about 77 meters long, traditionally it can carry up to 26 guests and crew is 19 plus because you usually need to have expedition leaders, Antarctic guides, you need to have helicopter pilots, submarine pilots, and so on. So your crew can easily be 25 up to, I know Legend has had up to 60 people. So basically you have to plan over a 10-day charter for about 1,500 meals. That gives you a little bit the range of complexity that it means to do provisioning in these more remote areas. And that's where companies like Greg's and Andrew's come in. And how do you help with that? It's often overlooked and not thought. It's taken for granted by guests that the food's gonna be there, it's gonna be on your table, and it's gonna look better than in any restaurant, finest restaurant in New York or Paris or anywhere in the world. And so in the wine industry, there's a saying that's a long way from grape to glass. And here we also, in the case of foods, it's a long way from farm to table. And how do you make it happen? There's two very important steps here. First of all is the provisioning of it, and then is the preparation of it. So we have the right people on the panel today to discuss that. So some of the challenges of yacht provisioning, and one of them is, if you compare to a restaurant, to a traditional restaurant, a yacht is moving, constantly moving. So there's certain windows where you can do provisioning. Often the yachts will be in locations that they've been to for the first time. So how do you deal with all for a first time? In many places that they go, especially if it's remote places, you cannot just get off board and the chef can go in and do the shopping. There's language barriers, there's local foods and many other things. Then the next question is, once I have my provisions, how do I store them? Where do I store them? Of course, large yachts have, and the expedition yachts that are being built nowadays do have those facilities to store more food. But still, if you have to think of 1,500 plus meals just for 10 days, it is a challenge. So it requires a lot of planning. The food needs to be stored safely and properly. First of all, because you can encounter rough seas, so you cannot just leave boxes and things anywhere. And then there's like all the cold storage. So non-perishable foods also play a very important role. And most of all, food makes people happy. So that's also the challenge for the chefs. The provisions have to be of good quality, but then the chefs also need to be able to prepare the foods in the proper way that guests expect. Otherwise, a charter can just turn to disaster if it's a simple thing that we take for granted, like the food, doesn't work. Also, it's important that you plan separately for guests and crews. Usually the type of foods that are served and the times that are served are different. And as I said, you have often different countries, different cultures, different foods. Some foods you cannot bring in to certain countries, and you have a whole ton of limitations. So that's important also to work with the local knowledge, the local agents, to bring in those foods or to source locally. And last of all, another thing that needs to be thought of is disposal, not just disposal of leftovers, but disposal of packaging. And that's where a little bit what we talked earlier, or a gentleman, Clive Jackson, talked about sustainability. For us in Patagonia and Antarctica is very important, sustainability. And just to give you an example, in Patagonia, in Chile, plastic bags are prohibited now for supermarkets. So, and in Antarctica, the Antarctic Treaty regulates things even a lot more. So that's another thing that needs to be taken into consideration when you do the provisioning, is how it's packaged and how do you dispose of the packaging. Here's a quick example of what you can do as a crew with local, or as Greg calls it, metro provisioning. This is an example of a yacht provisioning in Valparaiso in Chile. And at the bottom you see provisions arriving on a small jet plane in Antarctica. So in this case, the foods come sometimes from Europe. They fly in a big plane, then they fly on a domestic flight within Chile, then they get transferred to their Antarctica flight. So another very important thing is how do you maintain the cold chain and how do you time things with customs, with arrivals, departures, size of packaging, etc. So it throws quite a few challenges. Here we have some of the views, pictures that Andrew sent me from his provisioning company. So the first question that I would like to pose to Andrew is, in nowadays, the age of the internet and people being able to buy things over the internet and being delivered to the yacht, which also has become an issue in COVID times. What is the advantage for a yacht to be working with a provisioner versus for the crew to be doing their own provisioning if you are in a non-remote location? Because if you're in a remote location, you basically have no choice. So Andrew, if you could help me with that question, and then I'll turn it also on to Greg to give me his aspect.
Thank you, Carlos. First of all, thanks for having me as one of the panelists over here. So with regards to Malta, it is somewhat a remote location. So we actually defined it on this panel as a remote location because it's an island, not because it's Antarctica or Chile, which I think are a little bit more remote. So we're only just an hour or two away from Sicily by boat. So it's actually not so remote. However, it is an island, and being an island, we do need to take that into consideration, meaning that anything that is imported to Malta, so unless it is grown in Malta or farmed in Malta, it needs to be imported in. And that is why we would somewhat consider Malta a remote location. Now, going back to your question, Carlos, with regards to COVID and the effects of COVID, at the end of the day, the owner, and I think more so the captain, needs to look after their crew. The crew is at risk, whether there's the owner or whether it's a charter boat. The crew is extremely high risk that the whole season is at the detriment of COVID. So if one of the crew, and this is something that I've been hearing from a lot of captains and chefs, they've been coming up to me saying, listen, we have a problem. We cannot get off the boat because we've just arrived and we're in quarantine, or because we're going out on charter in a week's time, or the boss is coming over in 2 weeks' time, and the last thing we want is somebody to get sick with COVID. And that is where the provisioner comes in. As soon as COVID hit in Malta back in February, March, it took us around a week or two, I think, to reevaluate the situation, see what was happening, and then actually put in certain standard operating procedures for us to deliver to the client to reduce the risk. As I don't know if you can see from one of the images at the bottom right. So we even basically we clean our vans and sanitize them, weekly, and more so if we've got more deliveries within the week, and that is extremely important, not just for our clients, but also for ourselves as well. So even our team had to split and separate in 2 different teams, because if one of us was at the market or with a supplier and got sick, that means then the rest of the team is at risk and needs to go into quarantine. So we split our team into 2 so that we can carry on supplying our clients, even if one of the teams unfortunately gets ill. So, I had to take a lot of huge decisions and steps as soon as COVID hit, to be honest. Thank God so far, we've been lucky that we haven't been knocked ourselves. Mm-hmm. But admittedly, a lot of our clients, even those that used to enjoy going to the supermarket just for, a few, bits and bobs, if I may say so, have now even been asking us, can you just get, these small items for us, and can you do a little bit more so that we don't leave the yacht? So at the end of the day, I mean, we consider ourselves the N+1 crew. We are if there are 10 crew, we are the 11th crew member, and that is what our job is, to basically be part of the crew so that the rest of the crew can continue doing the work that they're supposed to do, basically.
Okay, and Greg, from your perspective, you supply yachts in remote locations, but also in the Med. Where do you see for the yachts the advantage of working with someone like you, obviously remote locations is almost, there's no other choice except to source locally, which we also do. So we work together. But in like the Med, where's the advantage in non-COVID times? Let's leave COVID out. Where's the advantage for them to work with a company like yours? You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you for having me as well. To build on what Andrew has said, now more than ever, crews relying on us as they've been forced to quarantine on boats. They've been asked to minimize contact with the general public. It seems that for food especially, which is what's consumed, the less hands that touch it, the less people that it pass through, the better for the boat. So if they could get something locally opposed to being shipped, obviously it's the best way to go. In our case, we've seen a real big increase in demand from shipyards, where there's a lot of crew that's not only having to work on board and contained to the boat, but there's a lot of subcontractors that are coming in that the cruise chef has to feed. So it's in COVID, it's helped us in some degree that we've had to do more for the crew. And Robin and Andrew, you probably both like to get off the boat every now and then and go just to get off board. It's a little bit of a break, but unfortunately, we've seen chefs not be able to leave and rely on us more and more. But all things aside, under most circumstances where there's a large crew and there's high demands, it's almost impossible for one chef, two chefs and two other crew to go in and do a top up for 2 weeks at a store and get the quantities they want and the packaging that they need for larger vessels. It's even if they could, it's the resources that you're taking off the boat from the crew members, having people leave their posts, having to rent a car, multiple trolleys at the store. Payment is an issue too in many cases. So provisioners, although sometimes aren't necessarily seen as an advantage locally when you're somewhere where you could shop, I think we do provide a service that the chefs need in order to make their lives easier and also to put less of a burden on the boat as well.
All right. Thank you, Greg. That sounds very insightful information. And now to turn to Robin and to Andrew. When you go to a remote location, whether it's Norway, whether it's the Arctic, Antarctica, even Patagonia, how far in advance do you have to start planning, thinking about foods, thinking, obviously, if you are a charter yacht, you get guests with different likes, maybe food allergies. Sometimes you have to supply or prepare foods that are kosher or halal or organic, sustainable, and so on. How much planning does go into this more remote type of provisioning?
You want to start, Andrew, or should I?
Yeah, Robin, if you can go first.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as better, obviously. As soon as we get the preferences from the guests, we can start planning our provisioning according to that. And I mean, normally we have to kind of give Greg our ordering list minimum, let's say 2 weeks in advance, so he get a chance as well to source down all the necessary products which we really need to have for that specific charter. And it comes to all the dietary requirements and the special products, whether it's kosher or halal, whatever it can be. So plus we need at least a week to get the provision from Europe as well down to Antarctica.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a lot of planning, but so far been very successful previous season. So that's great.
Andrew, your perspective?
Well, yeah, my take is that our season began in Patagonia in early November last year, but we started planning for it in Barcelona in the beginning of September. So, you know, in a sunny, warm, relatively a very busy place back then, actually. I'm sure it's changed a bit now. And you have to think ahead 6 to 8 months in order to satisfy the guests, the crew, and also to have the stores on board that cut down on the weight and the volume of stores you'll be flying in for your guests and for your crew. So it's, yeah, me and Robin had some late nights, and we had some anguished emails to Greg, but we pulled it off, and we've learned a lot from this. We definitely came back more, certainly stronger, more resilient chefs for it, and it was a great experience.
And one of the cool things that you do actually on Legend is you grow your own hydroponics on board, which I found quite amazing. So that's very interesting. I mean, you have to have quite a garden there to be able to supply for so many guests and crew. I assume you use it mostly for guests, maybe for garnishing purposes.
Exactly, yeah, just microgreens and baby lettuces, etc. We actually got the idea in Barcelona because they relaxed the cannabis laws there recently, and so there's a number of grow shops have sprung up around the city. So we got in touch with one, and he agreed to modify his existing setup for us to grow lettuces and herbs. And we had about 2.5 square meters spread over 2 levels of non-soil growing medium, hydroponically irrigated with fertilizer. And we ran on a sort of an 8-day cycle, so we could always harvest fresh herbs and greens to garnish guest dishes, and any leftovers would go to crew. But yeah, it was an extra few hours in our work week, but it made a big difference, and especially in Antarctica when you have a 2 or 3 day window for fragile items coming from Europe. It certainly filled the gaps in stuff we weren't confident that would arrive in good condition.
Yeah, that's quite amazing. Here we see some of the creations that Robin makes on board, and some of the work that Andrew makes. I mean, it's just amazing when you have to prepare food for so many people. Maybe you don't even get to see what the guests see. You spend a lot of time in the kitchen and preparing things, and so it's really a job that I think that is very much behind the scenes, that people don't see how much work goes into it and how much preparation goes into it, and especially again if you're in remote locations. So now another question back to Greg and Andrew is, you know, most of the foods that you need to have some fresh foods on board, especially fruits and vegetables. And how do you deal with seasonality or availability of foods? Because, for example, if you're going to ship strawberries, as we see here, you know, there's so many other things that need to be shipped. How do you deal with the seasonality of the fruit? Are all fruits available year round, or how do you work that out? Greg, if you can go first.
Yeah, sure. From our end, so we source in Rungis, Paris, as well as in Rotterdam, and every day there's flights coming in from all over the world where something is in season. Unfortunately, this time with COVID, it severely affected the price of shipping, and thus a lot of chefs say, how come this is now 4 times what it was last year? But that's unfortunately the consequence of wanting something that is out of season in one part of the world, but you have to fly in from somewhere else, and you have such a short window of opportunity to enjoy it while it's fresh. So we've spent quite a while and several years now finding vendors all over the world, but more importantly, setting up really reliable channels of logistics, because there's a lot of romance in gastronomy, but at the end of the day, we are a logistics business. We have to make sure that things come from all over, stay intact, stay in a cold chain, and get to the plate through the chefs exactly how they need them to be. So I'm happy to see them growing the microgreens on Legend, because it's one of those items that if it does take a week to ship, and it's 2-3 days after harvest before it gets up in the air, hits a couple of trucks and then has to get offloaded onto a boat, like Andrew said, I mean, the odds of it lasting more than 3 or 4 days are at best highly unlikely.
Yeah. Andrew, in your case in Malta, of course, in the Mediterranean, you have more availability from different areas surrounding Malta, but obviously all of this needs to be shipped into Malta. So I guess you also have that problem every now and then, or am I mistaken?
Yes, we do. I think it was Robin mentioning before. I mean, at the end of the day, you get a requisition list from the boss. So he or she is the person that decides what they want. And unfortunately, it's not always the chef that has to make that decision. So if they want, for example, only this morning, one of the chefs requested Napa Valley cabbages. Now, unfortunately, in Malta, we do not find Napa Valley cabbages. So, you know, we have to source that for, and we do have sources for them. So similar to Greg, yes, and I would reiterate this. I mean, it does sound very cool being a provisioner for super yachts and very, very bling, but we are a logistics company. So at the end, we need to, that's our job, is to get the right produce to you. However, maybe different to Greg, we also like to suggest some of the local produce. This is where, and then it's really important for the provisioner and the chef to really communicate on what needs to be brought in and what doesn't need to be brought in. So there are a lot of, very often we find misconceptions, which, for example, the microgreens. We've got a little farmer just around the corner from the office who's got an amazing microgreen farm and fantastic. That, strangely enough, I think it was about 6-7 years ago, we used to have to import them from Holland. And as Greg mentioned before, you know, you've got 3 days to actually get them over, and then another day till you unload them from the freight. And then, you know, you put them on the boat and they're already 4 or 5 days old. So, you know, we've managed to come up with alternatives. Then there are other foods, such as, for example, you know, tomatoes, prawns, tuna. People are under the impression that I want to have for example, Spanish prawns, which, may I add, are fantastic. Yes, but there is an alternative in Malta just as good. So that is where then us being the N+1 crew I mentioned before comes in. Obviously, then there are other items in Malta, you know, since we're speaking about Malta, for example, the local beef isn't anything in particular. So we need to have, you know, sources, foreign sources for these, and you know, get them to come in really fast. Same with oysters. We don't grow our own oysters here. So, you know, we'd need at least 2 or 3 days in advance to get the oysters in. And you know, at the end of the day, we are as strong as our weakest link. So if our suppliers don't come through, then we don't come through. And as Greg was saying before, it's all about strategic partners, be it locally or overseas.
Yeah, so that's very true. And, you know, we also experience that. One of the things that we suggest to chefs or to yacht owners and yacht managers is if it's a larger expedition, is for them to have the chefs fly, for example, to Chile and see what can be sourced locally. You two, Greg and Andrew, might not like that idea, but you know, it is, and I'm just joking, by the way.
I agree with you, actually. It's better to do it locally if you can, because the weight. I mean, we have weight restrictions now in Patagonia to Antarctica, which Robin and I have spent a lot of late nights over figuring out what we will ship and what we won't.
Exactly, and that's where you can work with you know, with your local agents who have the local knowledge. Also, the whole logistics is very complex because you know, if sometimes provisioners that don't have the experience have tried to send things via FedEx, and because they think it's going to get there faster, but in the end, the provisions arrive in Santiago and they have to go through customs. So you have to time it correctly for them not to arrive on a Friday or a Saturday. And FedEx doesn't have cold storage, so then it gets transferred to a Chilean courier. So that's where the advice and us working together as a team with the chefs, with the provisioners, and us as agents is very important for the success of any expedition. And we've had, you know, some things that always surprises some chefs sometimes is that in Chile you cannot find lemongrass, for example. Or on the other hand, from a customs point of view,
no fresh milk.
On another point, and you know, you cannot bring in honey into Chile. Chile has great honeys, and that's the other thing is, you know, is to encourage by bringing chefs beforehand for them to experience the local foods, and maybe they can also then prepare some of the local dishes for the guests, for the owners, and along with the wines. I mean, that's one of the things we also try to promote. Chile being a wine producing country, is Chile has some amazing wines, but often people prefer to go with what they know, and they ask us to buy French and California wines for them. And there's so much more out there to experience. So it is a very fun world to work in, and it's especially a little bit challenged now by this whole COVID thing and more restrictions. And also, as I was mentioning earlier, the other restriction that we're seeing, which is a good thing actually, but it creates another logistical issue, is the packaging. And especially when you're in Antarctica, the prohibition of styrofoam packaging and things like that. So that's another thing that needs to be thought about, the logistics. And here, just to give you an example, I don't want to, go on a lot with these pictures, but this is basically how things get shipped. You have to check temperatures. And then, for example, if you look at these beautiful pallets, it looks packaged great. But once they arrive in Chile, they don't fit into domestic flight because we don't have 777s flying domestically. So then these pallets need to be taken apart, and that's not allowed by customs. So the logistics start at the beginning, as Andrew was saying, in Barcelona. You have to start planning for your trip down south, and I'm sure it's like that in different countries. And Chile in general is still quite relaxed about the norms, and it is also very quick with customs. So other countries are a little bit more difficult to deal with. Anyways, I want to ask Andrew and Robin another question, and is what type of foods are the ones that give you the most problems when guests request them? How do you solve special requests when you're in such remote locations? Robin, if you can maybe go with that.
Well, I mean, we had charters where we had kosher guests on, and I mean, we have to speak to Greg, our supplier, get the right equipment for it, first of all, and we need to get the right food for it as well. And I mean, Greg's been very helpful with us to get our source down all that. And I mean, every kind of requirements we have on board when it comes to guests. I mean, we, of course, we do our best every day to make them happy and kind of satisfy whatever the needs. And I think that's the communication between the supplier and us, the chefs, and make it happen. And end of the day, I mean, we're trying to make everything from scratch on board. That's both me and Andrew's philosophy. So instead of bringing in fruits and yeast, for example, we making every single pastry from scratch on board, which is way better. And I mean, instead of flying 20 kilos of pain au chocolat or croissants across the Atlantic. So, and it comes down also to the microgreens growing. We're making our own chocolates on board. We making our kombucha on board. Andrew's top on all pickling and fermentation vegetables. So I mean, that's how we have to work when we are in such a remote area. Mm-hmm. So what do you say, Andrew?
Yeah, exactly. We set out to be as self-sufficient as possible, and we picked our team and trained them accordingly. A big point of this, the level of service we offer, we also dealt directly with the clients themselves, even with individual family groups within one trip. So we dug into their preferences. We dug into what gluten-free actually meant to them. We dug into how actual kosher they were. And we spoke to them personally on 2 or 3 occasions, and we had a chain of emails and asks and responses from them, so we could tailor our stores precisely to that trip and fly in as little as possible. So we had the ship was loaded at the end of October, And then we lasted until the end, sort of mid-March, with frozen meats and fishes for the guests and all our stock, etc., and dry stores. It was a big undertaking. It was the first time me and Robin had been so isolated for such a long time. It came off greatly, thanks as usual to our provisioners, whether it's Greg or any other provisioner that's experienced with providing yachts with excellent service. It makes a difference where you can just email and say, Greg, sorry to do this to you, but insert problematic issue here.
Yeah, I don't know if it happened to us with you, Greg, that a yacht in Patagonia, Antarctica requested strawberries from Holland, and then when they arrived, you did ship them, or someone did ship them from Europe, and they arrived in Chile, and the chef called us, or called Tobias, and told him, hey, the strawberries I opened it, and it says produce of Chile. So
I don't think that was us, because we have the greenhouses here that we usually send from. But
yeah, so I mean, funny things like
that long. I had other surprises with you guys though, where we learned in the last couple of years where we have to do the transfer at night and not during the day because of the temperature. Just having the pallets sit on the tarmac, even as you saw them covered, all the heat comes up from the bottom.
Yeah.
Up the entire load. Then it goes into cold storage, and you have the reverse effect of basically keeping everything that should have been refrigerated now at a warm temperature. So we had some loss. And berries were always the things that go first, as Robin probably remembers. We had a lot of smoothies with the bad berries, I'm sure.
We can't grow those yet, unfortunately. We're working on it.
And then the question is, who's at fault? If something doesn't arrive in proper condition. A question quickly for you, Andrew and Robin, of your experience that you've had now with provisioning in Antarctica, which for you has been probably the most what percentage of the food that you received would you say was in pristine, or let's turn around, how much of the food was in maybe not such an acceptable condition? And what can you do as chefs to beautify it? Andrew?
I mean, it comes down to the most sensitive items, like the berries, obviously, especially when the berries get unloaded to the second flight again. I mean, those boxes being handled in very poor conditions, which the people who's doing it is not aware of. That are X amounts of cases of fresh strawberries and blueberries and raspberries. The berries always takes a big hit. Some of the fruits as well, but in general, when it comes to all the dairies, vegetables, melons, I mean, they are, in my opinion, in a very good condition. Trying to avoid to get meat and seafood, because that's what, like Andrew said before, we planning already that 5-6 months ahead, especially in Barcelona. So we got all that on board already before we left Europe.
Yeah. Well, that's and Andrew, you were telling me the other day, when you receive things, sometimes they're not in such great conditions, but you have means and ways to make food look good again.
We had a team of 4 chefs, all quite very experienced at all levels of cooking. So we have our ways. I won't spoil the surprise for people who are watching.
Or the secret. Don't give away the secret.
Really lend itself to fruit salads and kind of light summery dishes anyway. I mean, you're wandering around in -20, there's ice on the deck, there can be blizzards and snowstorms, etc. The food has to be quite robust.
And there's another challenge when you are in remote locations is, for example, especially in Antarctica, is that you can actually be stranded for 2 or 3 extra days in Antarctica because the window. So you need to plan for extra days. And we had a yacht where the chef ended up serving peanut butter sandwiches to the guests, and the guests came back and said, these are actually the yummiest peanut butter sandwiches we've ever had in our life. So, there's some really cool anecdotes that I think we can go on for a couple of, more minutes or hours here talking and telling, things that have happened to us and also Andrew from his perspective, you know, in the Mediterranean. But I think, Lorna, I see you coming on, so that means that our time is up.
Your time is up, yes. So thank you very much indeed, Carlos, Greg, Robin, Andrew, and that was very interesting. And I think you've kind of whetted our appetite now for what is to follow, because we've been talking all about food and wine. And now Andrew Azzopardi is going to stay with us to host our next session, which is an actual wine tasting, a virtual wine tasting, never before seen on Keynote screens. So we're delighted that he's joining us on this pioneering venture. So guys, apart from Andrew, if you want to go back into the audience, and
we will, at least I will.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me just quickly say thank you to Andrew, Greg, Andrew as well, and Robin for taking part today, and Lorna and Alison, again, thank you for having us. An interesting subject. I hope we were able to keep the audience, you know, learning new things and also a little bit entertained with our little stories. So thank you again for having me. 2 segments.
Yeah. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos.
Excellent. Okay. So I am now going to move us on to the next session, as I say, and this is our virtual wine tasting. So we have Andrew Azzopardi, who you've already met. That's a nice clunking of a bottle there I hear in the background.
Oops, I unmuted myself.
Yeah, I'm afraid I like the sound of this wine tasting. It's just a little bit too early in the morning for me. It's 6:21 here in Vancouver, and I think the last time I tasted wine so early, it was one of those infamous Beaujolais breakfasts that used to be very popular in London in the 1980s. And I think the least said about that, the better. Absolutely, yes. So without further ado, Andrew is joined today by Caroline Stapley, who is a stewardess on the Dynasty yacht. And we have also Pierre Balzan, who is the managing director at the Melita Marine Group. And we're joined again by Quentin Bargate, who we saw earlier, who is the founder and CEO of Bargate Murray. They all have their samples of wine there. And I'm going to just, oh, here we are, Quentin, we've got you. So we've got everybody here. So Andrew, over to you, please.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Hi, Caroline, Pierre, Quentin.
Hello. Yes, Andrew. Good afternoon to everybody.
I hope you're all well. This is going to be the first virtual wine tasting.
Great idea.
20 minutes, so it's going to be relatively quick, easy, fun. I hope. I think you all got your samples. Do you have your samples?
We did.
Ready?
Just 1 second. I need to get them.
You need to get the samples.
Yeah, I have. And I've even poured some into a glass here, so it's all good.
Already. We've got 3 wines today.
Done.
I'm going to put the bottles in front of me immediately just so that you can all get a bit of a glimpse. We'll start off with the white wine. So the first wine that we're going to drink is Artes Chardonnay, 100% Chardonnay from Oregon in the States. So we're going to start off with a pretty decent Chardonnay. We're speaking value. I think it's important that we speak values as well over here. We're speaking around 30 euros plus VAT. And this is European value now. Then I had to go for a rosé, and the reason I went for a rosé is, let's face it, it is by far our best-selling wine on board Superyachts. If you are having fun, you know, in a warm destination, maybe not in Antarctica, just like multi-yacht legends were, but in warmer destinations, I'm speaking Mallorca, south of France, Malta, Italy, rosé is by far one of the most popular, and I chose a premium rosé, so it's a gourmet rosé, which is Minuti Prestige, so it's one of their premium ones. And then I went for an Italian wine, and we've got a Brunello di Montalcino from a very, very famous producers, Frescobaldi, and this is the Castel Giocondo. So I think let's start off with the white wine. when we host a wine tasting, we always start off with the lightest and work our way up to the strongest or the richest or the darkest wine. So if you can all pour your white,
already.
You're already poured.
We're well ahead of the curve here, I think.
Yes, me too. I have to say, Andrew, I'm very excited about this. We presently have no wine on board at all. Dynasty actually was sold a week ago, and we're about to become Mochafi 22. So I have no wine on board. So this is lovely to smell.
So you've got the rest of the crew really annoyed at you at the moment.
Jealous.
So let's start off with this. This is a 100% Chardonnay, and this Chardonnay is actually made by a French producer, Domaine Drouin, who are extremely famous in Burgundy for their Chardonnay in Burgundy. So the climate in Oregon, and this is why they actually moved to Oregon back in the 80s. I think they opened in around 1987. For the simple reason that microclimate in Oregon is extremely similar to the microclimate of their vineyards in Burgundy. So they wanted to replicate a wine that they produce in Burgundy, somewhat with maybe a bit more of an American style. And Veronique Drouin, who is the producer behind this wine, so woman power over there, the Veronique wanted to create a wine with the purity of Chablis, which is Chardonnay, but also the elegance of Merceau, which is also Chardonnay. And the funny thing about that description, and these are Veronique's words, and I wanted to mention this because even though they are both Chardonnay, as in a Chablis and the Merceau, they are extremely different because Chablis is usually very mineral, very pure, very refreshing, and no aging. Whereas a Merceau, though it's also elegant, it's very rich, and it's got a lot of complexity due to oak aging. So the interesting thing about this wine is, let's see if they manage to actually, if Veronique has actually managed to get this Chablis and Merceau both in one wine. So if we look at the wine, it's actually relatively light in color for a 2015. If you put it against a white background, if anybody has, we'll give it a nice swirl in the glass. Everybody swirling. And then if you're lucky enough to have a relatively large nose like me, you can put it all the way in the glass and take a nice big whiff. And we do that all the way. We do that, we actually swirl and put our nose into the glass. It's just like putting the volume in your speakers. So you're amplifying the volume of the aromas. I don't know, for example, I know Pierre likes his wine. Pierre, are you a fan of Chardonnay?
More a fan of Sauvignon.
And to be honest, I kind of guessed. I don't know why I thought so. And this is why I actually chose this wine specifically, because there is oak aging over here. So this is not your typical Sauvignon Blanc, really refreshing, but Veronique wanted to get some purity. I really want to see what your opinion would be of this. Shall we try it first?
Sure. I think they've succeeded, actually. I'm a big fan of Chablis, big fan of white Burgundy, of Grey Frisane, and this does capture quite a lot of the character of the French winemaker. So I'm quite pleased to taste it, actually.
I agree with you. I think it's extremely refreshing. So
yes, it is. I must say.
It's true there is oak. And what we take, when we say there is oak, the flavors that come out with oak is usually, for example, vanilla flavors or coconut flavors. But even though there are these flavors, they're not overpowering, they're not too rich, they're not heavy. So it's still got a nice feel to it. And that's exactly, I think that's exactly what Veronique wanted to produce. Just one other thing, Arthur. Does anybody know why it's called Arthur? It's actually just Veronique's son. Who's Arthur? So she named the wine after his son.
Charming.
It is. So, Quentin,
Andrew, does she have anything in mind as far as food pairing is concerned? Does she have something favorite that she likes to pair it with?
That's actually a fantastic question. So, I think one of the main reasons why many people are maybe scared of oaked Chardonnays is because one, they've either had really bad oaked Chardonnays, and there are quite a few of them, or two, and maybe the more popular reason is they're paired with the wrong food. Now, oaked Chardonnays, such as this one, and maybe even more oak, need a dish that can stand up to it. So if you have a dish that is extremely delicate, so say a plain grilled fish, I think that this will be overpowering. This will be just too much. So you need something to stand up to it, something maybe a little bit on the creaminess, something a little bit richer. I don't think, because there is a lot of purity and minerality in this, I don't think we'd need to go down something so rich as a risotto. However, something, maybe a darker fish, so even a fish with a little bit of sauce, so not just plain grilled with lemon, would probably work wonders with this. A pasta dish would work wonders as well. I would also think crustaceans, so lobster, prawn, mussels could work well as well. So this, and I think this is really important to bring in the food and the wine pairing. So it's really important that, for example, the chief stewardess or the purser discusses with the chef on what they're cooking so that they can actually match the dish. So super question, Caroline.
It's not, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, I don't believe this is, I mean, it's a fair price for what you're getting. It's good value.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, I think it's extremely good value actually, and the reason I think so is probably if there was Burgundy written on the bottle, the price would immediately double. And yes, the quality is really good on this. I'm actually really surprised on how good it is. I'm really enjoying it. And quality of wine, you also get quality of wine from the length in your mouth. So how long you keep tasting the wine, and hopefully it's an enjoyable taste in your mouth. So if you keep enjoying it for a few minutes, then you know that the quality of the wine is a superior quality. So that's a fantastic observation, Quentin. Quentin, I think you know your wines pretty well, it seems, or you're very familiar.
Yeah, well, I was impressed by the wines that have been delivered. Actually, I thought they're all good. I'm not a rosé drinker, I'll be honest, but it's quite a nice rosé, and the Brunello is terrific. It's really good. That's also good value. So yeah.
I know 20 minutes, so I think we've got to really fly to the next one, correct? And if I take off the cork, it would help.
Yeah. Okay.
I have to say I'm sharing this with my stewardess because we enjoy Andrew's webinar or seminars that he does at A Cruise in Mallorca. And so she was very keen to join in. So she's just off to the side sharing it. That's why you can see me always looking to one side.
That's fine. I'm glad you're joining us, actually, Caroline, one of our long-standing attendees for these seminars. So what's interesting about the Minuti I chose today, and I actually chose this on purpose, is that this is a 2018. Now, generally speaking, rosé wines, I don't know if you can see the label properly, rosé wines in general are meant to be drunk young. And that is across the board, and that is a true statement. Yes. However, I would say rosés along the years have really improved in quality. So, and this is something I want to say to people that are stuck maybe because of COVID. They've bought too much rosé from last year or this year, and they're stuck with it on the boat. If it's a gourmet rosé, such as Minuti 2018, it will still be fine next year. Or at least I hope so. Let's see what the panel think. In my opinion, I think it's perfect because it is a gourmet wine. If it were maybe the entry level, so say it's the M de Minuti, so I'm sticking to the same house, then maybe it could last 1 year maximum. But the Prestige, being a good quality, can actually last 2, even 3 years. And I would say it even gets better in the bottle.
Well, it's better than Whispering Angel, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you like Whispering Angel, Quentin?
I'm not going to comment on that. No, I don't. you get a lot of it around at yacht shows and on board yachts. It can be quite refreshing, as I said, but it's not really a proper wine, in my opinion.
I find it very refreshing with the Angel. It's got a certain creaminess to it. I personally prefer maybe the Prestige. It's got maybe a bit of a gourmet character to it. However, it's not a wine that I would dislike or refuse. Definitely not. I'm speaking about the Whispering Angel. So shall we? So when we say a wine cannot last or maybe goes beyond its best, so 2018 vintage, when would we say, okay, listen, this wine needs to be, thrown away or it's just too old on the boat? That usually happens for a rosé, especially a rosé or a white, such as Minuti. That usually happens when you stop smelling or tasting fruit. And I'm going to ask the panel over here if they get fruit. Pierre, I'm going to be nasty. I'm going to ask you, did you get any sort of fruity flavors, or is it just minerality? You're on mute, Pierre.
Can you unmute yourself?
You need to unmute, Pierre.
Pierre, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. Hold on.
That's it. That's good.
That's it. We've got you now.
We've got you now. Sorry, Pierre, I put you on the spotlight, trying to involve you a little bit. Do you get any fruit when you taste this?
I do, yes.
You do.
What comes to mind? What comes to when I taste it, the berries come to mind.
Absolutely, and to be even more specific, there's a real strawberry flavor to it. So you get this nice red berry flavor to it, definitely. And for me, that tells me that the wine is definitely still perfect to drink, and I would even serve it next season without a shadow of doubt. It's also still very refreshing, so the acidity is still very high. Just so that we get a little bit into the grapes of Minuti, just trying to stick to the time here, just that we get into the grapes. So rosé wine is mainly, so the king of rosé grapes is Grenache, and this is made with about 60% or 70% Grenache grapes. It depends on the vintage. Then there's also a little bit of Syrah, and there is Tiburen. Now Tiburen is an indigenous grape to Provence. So they actually put in a little bit of their own specialty grape. So it's actually a blend of grapes, and that's how they get the character of Minuti. Does anybody have any comments on the Minuti or questions? Maybe? No?
Not really Hopefully. My style, but it's quite a pleasant wine, but it's kind of, I don't know what to do with rosé. I don't drink it so rarely do I drink it that it's kind of the only time I really enjoy it is when it's a really hot climate place in the south of France or something, and it can be quite nice outside. Otherwise, a bit it's not really my taste. I'll be honest.
True. So I think maybe from that comment, Quentin, I'll rope in a little bit Caroline's comment from before. So, and that is the food pairing. And rosé is that type of wine where I think you also need to pair it with the right food. It's very often that it's stuck between red and white. So you have a dish in front of you and automatically think, shall I go white or shall I just go red? And rosé sometimes could be the perfect wine, especially when it's an in-between dish, such as, for example, tuna. When, tuna can actually be with white. You can drink white wine when you have grilled tuna, or you can have red wine with grilled tuna. And rosé sometimes is the perfect in-between wine. However, and this is something where I would agree with you even more. However, I would definitely choose a premium rosé wine with such dishes, because it's got to be a premium gourmet wine. And funnily enough, that is how rosé actually came into be so popular in places like Monaco and Cannes and Antibes and yachting. When people like Sacha Lechine from Whispering Angel actually introduced rosé wines on Michelin star lists, at first, most summer years were like, nah, you know, we're used to the cheap, sickly sweet rosé wine. And then these, you know, the Minutis and the Whispering Angels and the Domanots, these all started coming out and making really good premium rosé wines, introducing those onto the Michelin star lists. And that's when they really took off. So it was actually the food pairing that made them take off. Lorna?
Yeah, we're almost out of time actually, Andrew, and I hesitate to hurry this along because it looks so much fun.
It's much more fun than you think it's going to be.
It is. I just wish I was imbibing.
Well, that's
so this is a Brunello di Montalcino now. This is definitely the richest, darkest of the lot. Now, Brunello di Montalcino is made from Sangiovese grapes. And so why is it called Brunello di Montalcino and not Sangiovese di Montalcino? Montalcino is a place in Tuscany. And what happened was, originally, back in the day, they thought Brunello was the name of a different grape to Sangiovese. So Brunello means Bruno in Italian, which is dark grape. They actually named the specific grape in Montalcino Brunello, which is basically dark grape. Only over the time, I think it was in the 80s, when they were doing proper testing, that they realized that the Brunello grape and the Sangiovese grape are actually the same thing. Now, when we mean Sangiovese, we mean Chianti, we mean Super Tuscans, Tignanellos made with Sangiovese. So it's actually quite a popular grape in Tuscany, or the grape of Tuscany. And it's not a different grape to Chianti. But what really stands out from a Brunello di Montalcino from a Chianti, for example, both with the same grape, is that Brunello is a much richer wine because it is the warmest and the driest place in Tuscany is Montalcino. So we do expect, because of the climate, a rich, bold wine. So I know that we're really pressed for time here.
One more minute, yeah.
Drinking as fast as we can here, right?
Sorry?
We're drinking very quickly, but Lorna,
I don't want to spoil your enjoyment.
No, it's great. This is this is much more my style. I mean, this is a wine I would happily drink.
You look at home with it, I have to say, with your yachts in the background there.
So this is a 2014, so it's got just a tad bit of age on it, and it's not a Reserva, meaning that it had to be aged for at least 3 years in Slavonian oak barrels, or botte in Italian. And for you to be a DOCG, guaranteed wine, it's got to be minimum of 3 years aging in these Slavonian oak bottles. Sorry, Slavonian oak barrels. So, listen, Lorna, I really know we're pressed for time. Pierre, thank you for joining us. Quentin and Caroline, hopefully I'll see you soon. And cheers.
Cheers. Well, thank you very much, Andrew.
I must say, this Brunello is really nice.
Yes, it is.
So it's Friday afternoon and it's the end of the day now.
Well, you speak for yourself.
Excuse my glass, by the way.
Well, Andrew, I'd like to really thank you for this really interesting session, and thank you for delivering the wines so kindly to everybody, and to Quentin in the UK there. And thank you everyone for joining in, Quentin, Pierre and Caroline. And yeah, please stay on for the rest of the conference and continue to enjoy your wines.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.